Barbara Simpson here in Hot Talk 560 KSFO. I mentioned that we're going to have an update on the Drakes Bay Oyster Farm controversy. My guest to give us this latest information that has been discovered. It's shocking in that it happened at all, but given the nature of what's happening in Washington, to me it's not shocking either. Dr. Corey Goodman is with us. He's a scientist, an educator, and an entrepreneur. He was a professor at Stanford and UC Berkeley for 25 years, currently on the faculty at UCSF. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, and I could go on and talk to you about his background, but he is going to talk to us right now about what happened with this business with the Drakes Bay Oyster Farm. For those of you who do not know, this is a facility that has been there for a very long time. The current owners for more than 40 years. They produce oysters for this whole Bay Area for most of California. And they provide jobs. It's in an area where they had permission to do it. They produce 40% of the state's oysters, 30 jobs there, plus the income, plus the fact that they have never been found to be harming the environment, and they had permission to be in that area. All of a sudden, they got a notice from Washington, shut it down. Dr. Goodman, thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate it.
For inviting me.
Thank you.
To be here.
Thank you. Where are you? On line 11. There you are. Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate it. What is the current situation now? The last time I spoke with the owner, they had a deadline coming up this month where they had to appear in court again, and some new information was discovered. What was discovered?
That's right. Well, what was discovered was when the government, when the Department of Interior came out last November with their environmental impact statement, a number of us were surprised because they suddenly had new data, new claims about impacts on the harbor seals. Now, I have to tell you, as a scientist, it's always been a little far-fetched, this almost witch hunt to find impacts with the harbor seals, because your listeners may not realize, they might have the impression that the oyster boats are practically on top of the harbor seals. That's a false impression. They stay 700 yards, that's 7 football fields, away from the harbor seals with a sandbar in between them. I mean, they're just simply not disturbing them. So when we read that there were disturbances, as a scientist, I'm always data-driven. Where's that come from?
Yeah.
Well, it came from something that the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, had done to look at 300,000 photographs that the Park Service had collected from secret cameras over a several-year period. Anyways, let me cut to the chase. It winds up they brought in an outside expert, terrific guy. His name is Dr. Brent Stewart. He's a marine mammal behavior expert. He's from Hub SeaWorld Research Institute in San Diego. And here's what we discovered was that he filed a report in which he looked at those photos, and he couldn't have been clearer. 4 words, no evidence of disturbance. But it went further. What we discovered a few weeks ago was that after they misrepresented, just polar opposite.
Now, when you say they, meaning who? The government?
Well, the government, the National Park Service and the USGS, two agencies of Interior. The National Park Service, in their final environmental impact statement, claimed that Dr. Stewart found disturbances, where his report couldn't have been clearer. Now, here's what's so startling from just this last week or two, is that we've now discovered that after that was released last November, and after I started asking some serious questions about the science, they went back secretly, USGS staff went back to Dr. Stewart and said to him again, would you look at these over again, see if you've changed your mind? On December 10th, Barbara, he came back with a 2-page report to them that could not have been clearer. The guy has, of course, incredibly high integrity. And he once again said, look, I've looked at these again. There is no evidence that the oyster farm is disturbing the harbor seals. That second report has been buried, never been disclosed. I think you and I would call that a cover-up. Mm-hmm. It only came out in the last few weeks. And so what we're left with, the Department of Justice lawyers who are defending Interior in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, while people may be saying the science and the environment, this is a sideshow, boy, it's not a sideshow. In federal court, they're saying that the public good favors eliminating the oyster farm because of these major adverse impacts, and they've cited the harbor seal impact when we now know that the world expert they brought on as a consultant told them just the opposite, and he told them that 2 times over. Mm-hmm. I call that misconduct. I call it a cover-up. And it's been, of course, the false information was not only given to the Secretary of the Interior, it's also been filed in federal court.
Who's behind it? Is there a person, or is it just a mentality within the system that anything that is anywhere near the water that smacks of environmental damage is got to be damaging?
Well, you ask a really good question, and I have to say here I'm sort of straying from the scientist who likes facts. I don't know if there's one person. I mean, certainly at the very top of the Park Service, the director, John Jarvis, seems to have been personally involved in this. But I have to say, I think you hit it in your second comment. I think this is a cultural issue. Yeah. I think there are a lot of good people working in these agencies. They're taking orders from above, and the culture is once they have made a political decision, and in this case the decision was we want the oyster farm out. Damn the torpedoes at all costs. Mm-hmm. We want this thing out. Then people below them think that what they're supposed to do is to find harm, to find evidence. The problem is they've cooked the books. When President Obama came into office, he gave a very stirring speech to the National Academy of Sciences. I heard it. I was very moved back in 2009, and he said that in his administration, science would no longer take a back seat to ideology. And the problem is, over in Interior, they haven't gotten that word, and science is in the back seat. They're letting this predetermined agenda that they're going to get rid of the oyster farm drive, and as I've just shown you, they will make up data, they will cover up data.
Wow.
Very disturbing.
It is, and especially with everything else that's going on in Washington.
Right.
I mean,
this is our government.
It is, exactly. And when you have, this, people can say, who cares? It's just a bunch of oysters. But it's the principle of it. It's the fact of it. This is a livelihood. This is a prosperous business. Yes. It's not hurting anything. And you have this belief. You can take this and expand it onto the whole climate change issue, which is another story entirely.
But you've got it exactly, because, we tended to think, look, many of us in science beat up on government during the Bush administration because of some of their denials of climate change. This is very much the same. We didn't think the Democrats were going to do this. I respect what the president has said in terms of his scientific integrity policy, but what we're watching is business as usual over at Interior and in the National Park Service. And what I'd say to your listeners, look, I have friends on both sides. There are some people who have a belief, and I understand it, that they want wilderness in Drake Sestero. There are others who want a working landscape, who want to keep the oyster farm. It's been there for 80 years. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And I hope even your listeners who would like to see parts of Point Reyes become wilderness will nevertheless stand up and say, we are not going to allow this to happen based on false facts. There is a line, and when you start to make things up and fabricate, you've crossed the line.
When you said this was just recently discovered, how did it become public?
Well, fascinating story in terms of this report. I've been having conversations with our local congressman, Jared Huffman, who has a reputation from his days in the state legislature of reaching across the aisle. He and I were talking about him looking into some of the science issues because his district is ground zero. Mm-hmm. He is on the House Committee on Natural Resources, where on the Republican side of the aisle they have started an investigation of this. And so he had one of his staffers actually reach out to this scientist down at Hub SeaWorld at my recommendation and asked for all of his reports and all of his communication. And this was sent to Congressman Huffman several weeks ago. About a week later, I requested the same information and got it. So I thank the congressman for reaching out and for trying to bring some clarity to the situation. None of us knew that there was a second report in which the harbor seal expert said there was no evidence for disturbances.
What does this mean now for the owners of the oyster farm?
Well, look, that's a good question. some of your listeners may have either been at or listened to, because it's on YouTube, there was a hearing last Tuesday in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we're not going to know the outcome of that hearing for a number of weeks, perhaps even another month or two. It could take quite a while. But something was very interesting, and what this means for the oyster farm. The supporters of the National Park Service have been saying, and almost shrill in public and in lots of media, that the science is a sideshow. Don't pay attention to this. It doesn't mean anything. That's not what's happening in court. And as I listened to a panel of 3 judges, it seemed to me that several of them believed they had jurisdiction to look at this case. Several of them seemed to me that they were saying that, look, the Secretary of Interior went down the route of insisting on an environmental impact statement, and their questions at the end were very focused on, did he actually follow the procedures, and did he get the right information in terms of environmental impacts? And Barbara, I would say that line of questions leads very clearly to the conclusion, no, that he was misinformed. And something else just came out in the last week or two.
Okay, can you hold that thought right
course.
there? Hold that thought right there, and we will be right back with my guest. And is he on hold? Yes. Oh, okay. And hang on a second here.
You're listening to Barbara Simpson on Hot Talk 560 KSFO.
Barbara Simpson here on Hot Talk 560 KSFO. We're talking about the Drakes Bay Oyster Farm, and with us is Dr. Corey Goodman. Dr. Goodman, just before the break, you were elaborating on this situation of everybody being misinformed and did anybody lie, et cetera. Go ahead, but finish your thought.
Yeah, thank you. So the Park Service and their supporters have said in a very loud way that the science isn't important, the environmental impacts aren't important. And I've made the point with you that in court, that's not the case, that it's very central to the court case, and the Department of Justice lawyers keep using the false science to say the public good is for eliminating the oyster farm. Now, it winds up we've discovered something else in the last couple of weeks. A Freedom of Information Act was put into the USGS asking for all the different communications and emails while this harbor seal investigation and report was going on last year. Now, they like to say publicly that the science isn't important and that the secretary wasn't paying attention to it. Well, Barbara, that's not what we learned from their emails, and let me just give you a couple of snippets. First of all, they describe it to each other, this analysis, as very high priority, very high profile project. They tell us that the intention is to inform the secretary for his decision. It has to be done quickly to inform the secretary. Here's another email that NPS is chomping at the bit, breathing down my neck. They've got deadlines for deciding on the permit. Well, I'll stop there. You get the point. Mm-hmm. The point is that they wanted to be able to find impacts, disturbances of the harbor seals, and the only problem was when they went to their outside expert at Hub SeaWorld, he didn't know the score. You know, he didn't have the instructions in front of him. He looked at the information and he concluded no evidence of disturbance, and so they simply cooked the books.
So at this point, does the Department of Justice know the truth?
Well, yes. Last Monday, just whatever that was, 6 days ago, mm-hmm. I filed a formal complaint on this with the Secretary of the Department of Interior, Sally Jewell. She just came into her position in the last couple of months, and of course a copy of that was sent by the lawyers to the Department of Justice. And so, yes, as of less than a week now, they've known about this. They haven't responded. I think they're on the hot seat here because I think what the Department of Justice, I'm hoping, has come to realize is that they're defending a client that actually has done some bad things, has fabricated and lied when it comes to data, and that's something I hope justice takes very seriously.
And when you say that the client, that would be the Park Service and the Interior Department?
Thank you. You've got it exactly. That's right. Their client is the Department of the Interior and its agency, the National Park Service, because the oyster farm has filed a suit in court saying that the decision to close down the oyster farm was based on wrong information. And so what's being fought right now in court is to get an injunction so that the Park Service can't immediately close them down. The injunction would let the oyster farm stay open during this court case. And keep in mind, it's been there for 80 years, millions of dollars of taxpayer money over 6 years, not a shred of evidence of any kind of environmental harm. What in the heck is it going to matter if we let the oyster farm stay open for another year to let the court impartially look at the situation and make a decision?
You would hope so. Does this implicate Ken Salazar, who is the Interior Secretary?
Yes, it does. Ken Salazar made the decision, but I, of course, don't know what went on in the inner workings, but I have to say the record that I'm able to look at, it looks to me that Ken Salazar was misinformed, that he trusted the information coming from the National Park Service. I would pin this one, from my perspective, on John Jarvis, who's the director of the National Park Service, and I think there's a real cultural problem in that organization, and I would hope that ultimately the Obama administration would do some house cleaning.
Oh boy, they better hire some house cleaners, because they got a lot of house cleaning to do. We got one quick question from one of our callers. Let's see where you are, Fred. Let's see if I can do this right now. Fred in Burlingame, you're on the air with Dr. Corey Goodman and Barbara Simpson on KSFO. Go ahead, real quickly, please.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's more of a comment. You see, at first I thought they were trying to kick you out to give the business to one of their friends, but they want to remove you entirely and the farms. They want to go back to nature. You can't stop this movement. It was started before Obama, and it's going to go on after him, and all you can do is delay it. I think you should give it up and take your resources someplace else. Honestly, it's a back to nature movement that's bigger than you.
Okay, well, Liz, I appreciate that, and you're bringing up something that is what we touched on before. It's part of a whole movement, isn't it, Dr. Goodman?
That's right,
and you just can't pack up an oyster farm and bring it someplace else. It's not quite that easy.
No, that's going to be an environmental impact of itself to try to move it out. But look, this issue has cut the environmental movement right in half. You've got part of the environmental movement that looks at the future as being really a collaboration of sustainable organic agriculture with protecting the environment. I think that's the way we have to view our landscape going, and that certainly would say keep the ranches, keep the oyster farm. West Marin is ground zero. It's what Alice Waters and Michael Pollan and others look at in terms of sustainable agriculture. There are others in the movement who are purists, who think that being able to call a piece of land wilderness is something they're willing to fight for, even if that means kicking out the oyster farm and kicking out the ranches.
Yeah, and this is another part of it that we didn't touch on. This is that there are ranches there. It's not just this issue is the oyster farm, but there are other ranches in that area, and they all believe that the next step, if they get the oysters out, then they're going to go after the ranches with their herds. Earl in San Ramon, very quickly with a question from my guest on KSFO.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you to him for doing what he's done. I'm sure he's placed himself at a fair amount of risk. I know he lives out there. Our family's been park users, visitors, hikers for decades out of Point Reyes, and we've read everything that we can get our hands on with regards to the issue. And once again, thank you for what you've done. And again, I hope you're not placing yourself at too much risk for everything that you've stood up for.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much for that call. I'm sure Dr. Goodman appreciates it.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, have you put yourself in any position of risk because of your experience and your stature in the field? Because you're questioning the government.
Yes, I hope not. It certainly is a concern. When I first spoke out 6 years ago in my first testimony to the Marin County Board of Supervisors, I said my only hesitation in coming forward was for this very reason, that I knew I would be attacked. So far, the attacks are all verbal. It's a lot of personal things. There's a lot of misinformation, slander, and libel about me that goes out there. But look, I've got a pretty thick skin, and I think these principles are strong enough to fight for. the principles that we ought to have integrity of science, that facts ought to have some meaning, and that our government ought to be getting the best science to try to educate and inform policy decisions. I think that's something that all of us who are trained as scientists think would be worth fighting for, and so I'm going to stick with it.
And I think your phrase, the integrity of science, is really, really important. Sam has got a quick question. Sam, go ahead very quickly.
Hi, yes. Two quick questions. First, repeat the name of the expert, please, at Hub SeaWorld. And second, what can an individual do about this? Should we contact our congressperson, or what's the best thing to do to try to affect the outcome?
Good question. Take your answer on the air. That's very good. And tell us again, if you would, Dr.
Right.
Goodman, the name of the scientist from San Diego.
The scientist in San Diego, his name is Brent Stewart, and he's the one who wrote the two reports saying there were no disturbances. By the way, he's the same scientist who, when it comes to Children's Pool down in La Jolla, said there were disturbances, and that's what led to setting up a rope about 50 feet away from the seal. So, he's a marine mammal behavior expert. Secondly, what can you do? My advice would be to contact your congressman. This is time for Congress to find a solution. The House Committee on Natural Resources is looking into this. Whether your congressman is a male, female, Democrat, Republican, I don't think good science is red or blue. It should be bipartisan, and I'd encourage you to contact your congressperson.
That's terrific. Have you worked with either Senator Feinstein or Boxer on this?
Yes, I've worked extensively with Senator Feinstein's staff. Senator Feinstein got involved in this around the same time I did 6 years ago. She has written a series of outstanding letters. She is very disturbed by the scientific misconduct issue. She's spoken very strongly and eloquently about it, and I really have enormous respect for what she's done. I regret to say Senator Boxer has not gotten involved, and in fact, when Ken Salazar made his decision based on false science and misinformed science, she actually put out a press release congratulating him on making a decision based on good science. So I think Feinstein is on the right side of this, and I think Boxer's staff really need to get with it and need to understand that the integrity of the Department of the Interior is at stake here.
Wow, it's astonishing. It seems like the integrity of the whole government is at stake here. It just raises so many different questions in different areas. You're going to stay connected to this. I hope we can stay in touch with you. And if anything happens in the interim, please give my producer a call and give us an update. You can come on the air anytime and tell my audience what happened, okay?
Thanks very much. I'll be back with you again. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. His name is Dr. Corey Goodman, and the issue that we're talking about is the Drakes Bay Oyster Farm. And the website, by the way, is Drakes, Drakes, Bay, B-A-Y, Oyster, OYSTER.com. So you can go there and find out, get an update on that. Certainly do a Google search and check it out. He mentioned that the Department of Justice hearing, or the Ninth Circuit hearing, rather, was on YouTube. I have not seen that. I'll have to track that down myself and take a look at it. But, this is just another example. And again, Salazar made the decision, and he pushed it. We want it right now, and he pushed it through. Did he know that the information that he was using as evidence was not true? We don't know. But certainly, at least it shows from what information that they have found for the FOIA request, where they got the emails, get the background, and find out who said what, when, where, to whom. They knew. They went back to this doctor. He did his report again, and he came back and said it's not causing any harm. And yet they misquoted him. So you could, I guess, Salazar, who's, by the way, not Interior Secretary anymore, he's out, I guess, as of this month, I think it was, or last month. But in any event, he may be off the hook. But what about the Park Service people? What about the other people? What about the Department of Justice? They are pursuing the case in court, defending these people. So far, they have not responded to this new information. Eric Holder, are you home? Or are you just too busy? Or is he going to get, if anybody questions him, he'll say he doesn't know? This is just another example of the caliber of people in the administration, in the bureaucracies. And you know something? The truth be known, if we had a Republican-elected president, the bureaucrats are still there. They don't change. The secretaries change. The top people change. But the people in the bureaucracies don't. And this is a perfect example of the situation with the environmentalists. You want, on one hand, you want people who really do want the truth of science. The integrity of science should not be compromised. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. I almost asked him which he was, but you know what? It doesn't matter. What he's saying is absolutely admirable and correct. It's just shocking. But we'll keep you updated on it. Check it out yourself. And write that letter to your congressperson. Write a letter to Barbara Boxer. Didn't she live in Marin? She was in Marin. Wasn't she, when she was local politician, didn't she represent Marin? I think she did. I mean, it's ridiculous. But she's a state senator. So you have Feinstein on the side of the oyster farm trying to protect it. And you have Boxer who just said, hey, Salazar, you did a great job. Good for you. And she shuts up. But you know, Boxer did represent Marin. She didn't even care. I mean, this is a big story. And you say, oh, it's just a bunch of oysters. No, it's not. It's the principle of it. Because if they get rid of that, there are ranches in that area too. They'll get rid of them. It's a very dangerous situation. And it's part of this environmental purist movement where you'll only have safe nature and beautiful nature if you get people out. So get rid of the people, and the world will be a wonderful, safe place. The way God intended. No, Gaia intended. There's no God. That's right. I forgot. Forgive me. I'm Barbara Simpson. We will be right back.